In one of my past videos that I made, I talked about how Japan was opening up to group package tours on June 10th, 2022. When the Japanese government and Prime Minister Kishida made the announcement, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. All of the media was covering this in Japan. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there who were celebrating the sudden decision to at least open up to group package tours. And many people thought that this was the beginning of the opening of Japan. So on June 10th, the first day of the so-called welcoming of group package tours into Japan, I turned on the television, NHK Evening News, anything was going on. They had sent an NHK reporter down to one of the airports in Tokyo, I think it was Haneda, and they were looking for any group tours that supposedly might be arriving on June 10th. So the reporter found two foreigners. One was coming here to study, and the other was a business person. However, they didn't see no foreign group tours coming in for the group package tours. Hi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Mitsuno, and this is the Man in Japan channel. In today's video, I'll give you my personal take on the present government's plan to allow group package tours into Japan from June 10th. If you want to stay updated and hear about what's going on in Japan, please hit that red button and subscribe. So where are the foreign tourists, those group package tour tourists that Prime Minister Kishida and the Japanese government and the Japanese media made such a big deal about it back in May 2022, 3 weeks ago? But the fact is, they never left their countries. The reason is that the announcement was made on May 26th by Prime Minister Kishida, but the Prime Minister's Cabinet Office and the two ministries involved did not set any official guidelines on entry procedures, nor did they update the COVID-19 guidelines. Then on June 8th, 2 days before the official opening and welcoming of these group package tours, they finally released the guidelines. So of course, it never happened. No one came on June 10th because tour companies overseas could only begin to recruit and to market from June 8th. Due to lack of communication, transparency, and common sense by the Japanese government, some travel companies abroad and in Japan have decided not to participate or take part in the new launch of the June 10th group package tours. Another big surprise for some overseas travel companies who were very interested in sending over group tours to Japan was they found out that all tourists will now require a visa. Pre-COVID tourists were able to arrive in Japan without any visa and then were issued a free tourist visa upon arrival. That's no longer possible. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs now says that every tourist and visitor needs a visa. So add on another extra step, more lost time, and just another obstacle levied by the Japanese government. So think about it. What does all of this tell you about the Japanese government's big new opening up to group tourists? Go figure. Thus, there won't be any foreign group tourists into Japan until all the hoops have been jumped. And since you're dealing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Health, and sometimes, as many of you may know, the ministries do not get along among themselves, I think you can imagine why things are going to get much more confusing and difficult before it gets better. Japan is the last remaining advanced country in the G7, the Global 7, with such strict entry controls. Prime Minister Kishida continues to say that Japan would review its COVID-19 measure in stages after consulting with public health experts and bring Japan into line with the other G7 nations. But the question is when? No one knows when that may be. For the group package tours, we only heard about the basic requirements that entering tourists would have to be vaccinated 3 times, promise to comply and wear a mask, wash hands, social distance, and only a small number of people will belong to each group. They would have to stay with the group, and they would always be accompanied by a Japanese tour guide. And of course, they would have to buy travel insurance before coming to Japan. There is a huge number of overseas independent travelers and tourists, and a big economic opportunity waiting for Japan if it eases its restrictions and opens the gate. Just recently, the World Economic Summit ranked Japan as the #1 tourist destination in the world. In the past, tourism in Japan started really late, but once it started, it boomed. From 2011 to 2019, Japan's tourism increased 5-fold. In addition to the huge interest in visiting Japan, there are many more people who want to now come to Japan because of the weak yen. Japan is now like on a 20% discount bargain sale, especially compared to pre-COVID times when it was 110 yen to the dollar. Yesterday, it was 135 yen to the dollar. But although the yen is weak and people really want to come to Japan, due to the strict government entry restrictions and lack of concrete information and good communication, it could all just be another lost opportunity for Japan. Where on one hand, Japan is so unbelievably efficient and organized in regards to, for example, public transportation, punctuality, orderliness, and attention to detail. On the other hand, when it comes to doing anything new for the first time that has no precedence, many times Japan ends up looking very disorganized and inefficient. As many of you know, Japan is very conservative and very risk-averse. Japanese usually don't want to be the first to start something. They'll often wait for others to go first and watch and see what happens, and then make a decision whether or not to follow. Japan is usually not a pioneer or trendsetter. Japan is more of a follower. You can see this in business, in universities, in government. And I've also seen what seems to be kind of a common practice is that many times Japanese organizations take so long to decide to do something. And then at the end, they suddenly are rushing around, throwing things together. Everything is last minute just to make sure that they meet that deadline. And it ends up being in kind of a haphazard way just to get it done. The June 10th Japanese government launch of group tours is a good example of this. Moreover, in my eyes, sadly, Japan many times undermines their own progress and they trip over their own 2 feet. I've made a video before about how Japan is probably one of the most efficient countries in the world. Japan definitely is a land of paradoxes. In addition, I think what is keeping the tourist issue on hold is the politics and the priority of economic benefit versus potential health risks. Prime Minister Kishida has recently closed the Higher House on June 15th, and they're going to have a new election on July 10th. Part of the political dynamics is that it will be the older, retired people who are no longer part of the workforce who are mainly worried about potential health risks like the coronavirus. And they are the major voting bloc and the majority of voters. The younger people who would probably choose economic benefit versus potential health risk don't vote. There's very little interest and a sense of apathy by younger people in Japan to vote in any election. So the last thing Prime Minister Kishida and the LDP party want to see is that if they open up Japan to all tourists now and suddenly there's a huge spike in COVID numbers, they could then experience a backlash right before the July 10th election. Prime Minister Kishida does not want to see the same thing happen to him that happened to the former Prime Minister Suga. Former Prime Minister Suga was forced to step down from running again due to his handling of the coronavirus. His reigning term was only for 1 year, so Prime Minister Kishida and his LDP party must cater to the older senior voters to be sure that they can win and retain the majority with their ally party so they can get things that they want to get done. If Prime Minister Kishida and the LDP win and keep a strong majority, then after July 10th, they may be a little bit more aggressive in opening up Japan. My guess for now is that if there are interested foreign tourists, maybe some of you, who are willing to jump all the hoops, get the travel insurance, get the tourist visa, and go through all the paperwork and pledges, then maybe, just maybe, the first tourist group may arrive in mid-July or more likely even later. But on the positive side is if you are able to get through all the bureaucratic red tape and paperwork and are willing to join a package tour and come to Japan, it would be a good time to come and see Japan because there will be very few foreign tourists around and the places to visit will not be as crowded. You may recall, pre-COVID, foreign tourists made up about 30% of the overall tourists in Japan. And that means that if you come to Japan with a group tourist this summer, there will be 30% less tourists in Japan. But for many of you who want to come and visit Japan independently, the when question is much more uncertain and unknown at this time. There is also a secret rumor, and again, it's only a rumor that I have overheard, that a Japanese pharmaceutical company is presently working to develop a COVID-19 medication that can easily be taken orally, and the Japanese government will not allow independent travelers, tourists into Japan until this medicine is tested, proven safe, and available throughout Japan. And the estimated time, according to this rumor, of completion of the testing and the development of this medication is this summer. But then it probably would still take several months to mass produce and distribute throughout Japan. So who knows when all of this will be done. Finally, my own layman personal guess would be at the very earliest, Japan may open to independent travelers and tourists at the end of this year, 2022. But I think much more likely, if the rumors about the new developing medicine is true, as well as other circumstances and variables, I think Japan would probably open up to independent tourists and visitors maybe in early 2023. Sorry. Again, if you want to stay updated about what's going on in Japan, please hit that like button and subscribe to the Man in Japan channel. Arigato.